with the Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Dr. Bharrat Jagdeo. And as per norm, Dr. Jagdeo will first make his presentation, following which you will be allowed to ask your questions or seek clarifications. So I therefore invite Dr. Jagdeo to make his presentation.
Thank you very much. Allow me to thank you once again for coming to another press conference hosted by the opposition. There have been quite a few issues in the media in the past several weeks, and various positions have been given by both the government and the opposition and civil society. I've been called often to comment on various issues, and I've refrained from doing so, hoping that I can, at this press conference, address all of those concerns that have been raised or questions asked of me. And so those who have called me, and some of you are here, please feel free to raise those issues again that you asked me to comment on during the course of the past 2 weeks. I wish today to start by welcoming the two shows to Georgetown, and I do hope that they have a very productive conference, a conference filled with discussions that in a real sense will move the development of our Amerindian communities forward. We had an opportunity Sunday to meet with some of the two shows. At that meeting, the General Secretary and I spoke, and we spoke extensively about the course of our history and the changes that took place under the tenure of the People's Progressive Party in office, and how dramatically life has changed and the circumstances of those communities have changed since we assumed office or in our tenure. We acknowledge that there's still many things yet to be done in those communities, but from the perspective of restoring and enhancing the rights of indigenous people, our efforts have been unparalleled. And from the perspective of basic needs, if you were to assess poverty from you can assess poverty from three perspectives. That is, economists do that from an income level, an expenditure level, and in terms of access to basic needs. That whilst we have not been able to radically transform the village economies in many of those areas, that in terms of access to basic needs, those communities have improved tremendously in terms of water and access to health facilities and education services. We pointed out how badly our children were treated in the past. And so it is with great surprise that I saw the President speak about the state of education in the hinterland. And as a historian, I expected him to trace the evolution of the development in the education sector for hinterland people. He did not. Because had he done that, he would have recognized how abysmal a failure the PNC was in office prior to 1992. He would have recognized that where we are today is light years away from where we started, although there's still a long course to travel. And he would have recognized, for example, that most of our kids in the hinterland, in fact, 95, 96% of them never had access to secondary education because there simply were no secondary schools, or very few secondary schools, I think one or two, in the entire hinterland. And those circumstances improved tremendously. The PPP built several schools, secondary schools in the hinterland. We got, when the kids finished primary school, we got them to go to those secondary schools and stayed in dormitories that were built. The dormitories have been expanded several times. As I was president, they keep filling up, and we kept expanding them to accommodate more kids. The numbers that came out to the city to study and to be incorporated into the police force and the nursing profession or as teachers was a huge number at almost all of our educational institutions through the Hinterland Scholarship Program. And in an unprecedented fashion, we had close to 100 young Amerindian kids going abroad to study who've returned now as young professionals. So he should have recognized all of this. And he would have recognized that part of the process of moving forward was the next phase that we had planned, where we had already wired buildings in 100 villages, and we had ordered the solar panels to put on the roofs of those buildings so that we could, the computers were ordered. In fact, the computers came here, and from what I gathered, they're being given out on the coast. But 2,000 of those computers should have gone to each of those 100 villages, 20 each, to start a computerization program. And the CSOs that they fired would have been helping to teach every village, every one of those 100 villages, the people in those villages, how to use computers, etc., so that they can advance their education and educational opportunities. He gave a static view, analysis of education, designed to say things are bad in this area. He's not recognized the progress or the forward-looking plans of the PPP. In fact, what he has done, his government has done, is after almost a year and a half in office, that program to computerize those villages is stalled. The solar panels that would have that were bought, the 6,000 solar panels that were bought to go into the hinterland to complement the 15,000 or so that were already given out, bought under the PPP, his government has taken those for his office and for State House to use there, depriving 6,000 families and those kids in those families a chance to have electricity so they can study. Isn't this hypocritical? Is it not hypocritical? And so we spoke about that, the history. I'm not going to go into healthcare because healthcare is the same situation. Health huts in every village, close to 400 health workers hired from the villages and trained and put on the government payroll. That was the history. We got several people who from the hinterland to go into the MEDEX program. They were trained there, apart from the Amerindian doctors. And we upgraded the regional hospitals so that they could have access. And there was drug most of the time. There were a few times when we had distribution problem, shortages, but most of the time there were drugs available. not now. It's deteriorating. And so we spoke about that. But the critical issue, as I'm coming back to these points about what should occupy or what occupies people's minds most, these two shows' minds most, from my interaction with them, were issues that were not dealt with at all at the conference or in the president's speech. First of all, they were talking about, the PPP tried to steal the two shows to talk to them, silly things like those. The president then said, oh, this two shows council meeting started under Burnham in 1969. He had to put the stamp of Burnham on the two shows council. Never mind that legislatively it was called for, and the first national two shows council on the law was held in 2006. Somebody needs to tell the president there's a big gap between 1969 and 2006 when some meeting was taking place. So those were the things. So let's hear what were the biggest concerns that the two shows raised with me, and how are they being addressed. The first has to do with land, the land titling activities. I saw the president acknowledge that Amerindians now have 14% of the territory. But another member of his government, Eric Phillips, is upset about this. They got there because the PPP worked steadfastly to title Amerindian lands and have given several titles to many of these communities. That's one. And the record of this government is that when it took office, it disbanded the Amerindian Land Titling Unit. And up to today, almost a year and a half in office, it has not titled a single Amerindian community. Not a single Amerindian community. It disbanded that unit. So the questions are, how soon are they going to resume this process? And what are their plans to continue the titling activities for these villages? How many villages are now being considered for titling and for extension? That would be a specific that the leaders would appreciate getting, And we in the opposition would also like to know. That's a first issue. Secondly, I mentioned about the solar panels already. How are they going to, we found that there were several homes and communities that did not get all of the solar panels they needed. So the 6,000 were for them. How are they going to address those? Are they going to give them the 6,000 panels, buy new ones, or are they going to continue keeping them for the president? That's what the leaders would like to know. Thirdly, the community development plans that we had gotten every community to put together. We wanted two sets of activities that would have secured funding from the government, some of it from the budget and some from the Norwegian program. Those activities would have focused on food security, and secondly, the development of an economic activity that will generate jobs for young people and income for the villages, for every village. Those villages produce those plans. Where are we with the implementation of those plans? Because we left the money to do that. The Norwegian resources are there. Same program that they tried to get in Norway to withdraw the money. The resources are there. Where are we with the implementation of this program? Then two shows have been very worried about the government moving forward on issues that affect their communities without this principle being observed, that the APA, APNU, and every single international organization used to ask the PPP whether it was observing in relation to every issue in the Amerindian community. It's called FPIC, Free Prior Informed Consent. And so we took extraordinary steps to address any issue that we dealt with in these villages by the involvement of communities, making sure that they participated freely. We have heard from this government that they announced several initiatives for these communities, but these initiatives seem to be originating not even from the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, but from the Office of the President, without any consultation. So the first thing we heard is that we are going to amend the Amerindian Act to make it into the Indigenous Peoples Act. And we heard Sidney Alicock lamented or chastised the two shows that he had given them 2 weeks the last time the NTC made to submit their comments for the amendment. Well, something as critical as this, when we put in place that act, you would recall the hundreds of meetings that we had. It took several years, meetings in the communities, in the sub-regions, bringing people together, allowing the NGOs to comment on this. The huge debates that we had before we passed that act. And so I saw the president read out section of the act where he mentioned the functions of the two shows. But he did not deal with the progressive elements of the act. And those were, I'm just going to quickly go through them quick. One, we put in that act a process, a clear, concise, definite process through which people can access land, which obligates the government to respond in a timely manner. So we said in the act, if you're living continuously on the land for 25 years and you're a community of about 150 or more, you can file a claim, and the government is obligated to process your claim, not necessarily issue you with the land, but process the claim. For the first time, Amerindians had a definite process through which they can access land with clear criteria. Secondly, we gave something that practically no country in the world has given to the Amerindian community: subsurface rights, particularly for small and medium-scale mining, where they can veto those. Large-scale mining, there is an obligation to consult, and the community in each of these cases, medium, small, or large, the community must get royalty from any mineral that comes out of their land. That was the second major thing. And the third element of the act that I think was very progressive, that was it gave greater autonomy to the villages themselves in terms of rule-making and managing their affairs. There are several progressive features of the act, but three that were huge. Now, why this amendment? Are they going to increase rights of Amerindian people? If the purpose of the amendment is to increase the rights of the indigenous people, we will support it. If the purpose is to increase resources available to indigenous people, we will support it. And if the purpose is to increase opportunities available to indigenous people, we'll wholeheartedly support any amendment. Wholeheartedly. But if there is, but my fear, it's a bit more sinister, and it has to do more with the name rather than the substance. Moving it from Amerindian to indigenous then opens up a whole range of claims and interpretations of who is indigenous. And we have already heard Eric Phillips arguing that, you know, the Amerindians didn't come first here. So it is the opening up of this. Now, if that's the objective, we'll fight it. So, because we know what is Amerindian today. We know what, that's clear to us. The indigenous, I don't understand this. It opens it up. So, let me telegraph this clearly. If that's the purpose, to create doubts about the definition of who are the beneficiaries under this act, we'll oppose it. But if it has to do with more rights or resources or opportunities for indigenous people, we will support. You have a clear position from the PPP. Until now, we don't have clarity from the government. Which is the proposing this amendment. And it must be, they have to go to each village and consult with people like we did. And I heard, so that's another concern. And then the final concern I'm going to talk about is that the two shows raised with me is about the opt-in mechanism under the Norwegian agreement. It seemed to have died. And they seem to be killing the low carbon development strategy too, and the possibility of new funding. So these are just some of the things that we discussed, some concerns raised by the two shows. I hope that these are addressed clearly at the National Two Shows Conference. Now, there is one thing that worries me a lot from the President's speech. The President has indicated that he wants to set up an authority, Indigenous People Authority, consistent with what I've just said. The maximum leader decides one day that he wants to expand his office, so he sends some soldiers to chase the people out of the Walter Roth Museum. So now he decides, contrary to all the work that we have done, that he wants to set up an Indigenous Peoples Authority. He proposes it, and it's going to get implemented. Now, this is the beginning. He called the Ministry a post office. This is the beginning of undermining constitutional bodies. What will happen that Sidney Alicop and Garrido Lowe and the entire staff of the Ministry now of Amerindian Affairs, the Ministry, yes, well, it's Amerindian Affairs as far as I'm concerned, not name. It is Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. I don't know about this government's definition, because they're big into this name thing. But the two of them, it is basically downgrading them, and the entire ministry. The entire ministry has now been, lowered. The President described them as a post office. That is the same ministry that implemented all the programs under the PPP, Civic, with less staff and with one minister, not two ministers, and implemented our programs in the hinterland, along with the Two Shows Council and with the villages. So the Two Shows Council is there too. This authority now will help to implement. So where does it sit in our legislation? The the National Two Shows Council and the membership, that's situated in our laws. The Ministry of Amerindian, not Indigenous Affairs, Amerindian Affairs it is, that ministry is situated in our laws. Where does this authority come in? I think this authority, with members appointed by the president, will now take over their role and undermine both of these bodies. Now, I heard the chairman of the NTC asked for a secretariat in the city. If the president is so concerned about implementation, then help the NTC get their secretariat and help them to hire some staff so they can oversee implementation. Do not set up an alternate body, but I suspect this alternate body is to undermine the NTC and the ministry. It's because you can easily support their efforts. And so we have seen a retrograde suggestion from the president in this regard. And this idea about having planning units in every ministry, it cannot substitute for a lack of vision. If you have no national plan, how would sectoral plans fit into the national plan or a strategy? This government has absolutely no strategy to take our country forward in any area, in the social sectors as well as the economic sectors. And putting planning units in every ministry will not help with that. Will not help. In fact, it will just expand government, and what they would end up doing is hiring a few more people, not through any public process again. So you'd have some people who are over 65 heading all of them. So I want to, as I started off, wish the two shouts all the best in their deliberations. I hope that the government listens to people and they would address some of these concerns that I've raised. Now, I want to go to one other area, and then I will take questions. It has to do with what is going on in the media about the bond issue. We thought, in fact, after Trotman came out at the beginning and said, the president appointed this body to oversee or to report back within 2 days on a contract that cabinet had fully debated and sent to the parliament. We thought that it's not going to really be objective, but we were prepared to give them a chance. I saw Trotman saying, well, we visited, and it is PAHO WHO compliant. I don't know whether Trotman now is a specialist on assessing the quality of, the standards of PAHO WHO. He visited a building that was under construction. And he said, it is not true that the building is not prepared to accept drugs, that it's in a state of disrepair, because they have an air conditioning there. They have a changeover switch. A changeover switch is just a switch you pull to when you get blackout. If it's manual, you pull it down. It change from GPL to your generator, and if it's automatic, it switches over. They have a changeover switch. They have electronic and physical security. So they must be compliant. An AC, a changeover switch, electronic and manual security. This is pure I don't understand what this. I can't find a word to describe it. I can't find a word. In another place, I'll call it something else. But then the excuses did not stop there. So Nagamutu wants to outdo Trotman. He then says, oh, there could have been a fire, you know, and it's the congestion that caused it. You know, we had to get a second place. This is the committee of Harman, Trotman, and Nagamutu is the cover-up committee. It's called the cover-up committee. And this thing is not just about Norton. Find out about the people who have been frequenting this place in Middle Street. And you will find how deep the connections run into the cabinet. And that contract is not about Norton himself. Norton was directed to initiate that. Until now, they haven't answered how Norton knew. They haven't answered that question, but Norton was directed by members of that cabinet to negotiate this deal with this individual, and they all knew about it when it went to the parliament. Nagamutu said to me it was fully debated at the cabinet. If this cabinet debated that issue, why was Norton apologize? It means we have a dunce, an incompetent cabinet that couldn't ask basic questions. You can't ask, what is the square footage here of the building that we're negotiating? They said that, and then they came back now, they're throwing Norton under the bus. And so I heard him said today, Norton, I don't know anything about, I'm new, you know, I don't know, a year and a half. He was the one, the biggest one talking about single sourcing under the PPP, about single sourcing from Ramroop. Norton, every week in the parliament. And today his excuse was, I don't know much about procurement. I don't know about these, what called competitive bidding or selective tendering. But he knows about single sourcing. He doesn't know about, you know, pre-qualification. Suddenly, looking for sympathy. They're hoping that, you know, people would say, oh, poor Norton, he doesn't know much about this stuff, that it will go away. And so now they're saying, rather than terminating the contract, they're saying, let's give it a year, the Trotman Committee. In the year, this guy would collect $150 million. He'd collect $150 million, who bought the building for $25 million, and our drugs will not be stored properly. It is a cover-up by the cabinet. Huge cover-up by the cabinet, and they're all involved in it. The next thing is, just imagine if the PPP had hired somebody who was convicted for drug dealing. Oh, the newspapers would go wild. He had to be Jagdeo's friend. He had to be Jagdeo's friend. Even when, you remember one time the USAID and WikiLeaks, they said that we gave Roger Khan a forestry concession. No, that was the US report came out that we gave Roger Khan a forestry concession. And then, it was not true. Then when WikiLeaks broke the story and we checked who told the US Embassy, it was an APNU member. At that time, a member, I don't want to call his name now because I don't think he is in active politics. But if you go to the WikiLeaks, you will see that APNU told them that we gave Roger Khan this forestry contract, and which was untrue, but it got into a US report. Now, this is not once. So this individual was hired. But what about Mr. Blackman? They brought him back too. He was to replace Norton, first at the Georgetown Hospital chairman of the board, and then to replace Mr. Norton. How much of the drug money that Mr. Blackman was involved in, because I think he's working out a plea deal now in the US, how much of that went into the APNU campaign? Because he was a big donor to APNU. How much of the drug money went into the campaign for APNU? And now we see a second convicted drug dealer being hired by the government. And people don't say whose friends they are. You know, everything used to be Jagdeo friends in the past. Whether I knew the people or not, it had to be our friends. And the PPP was doing this. But what is even worse is this fuel saga. And we have not scratched the surface of it as yet. We raised it a couple of times in the past, but it did not pick up the traction that it's getting now. I want to urge a greater investigation of the whole process of the importation of fuel, the smuggling of fuel in the period after the new government took office. And you will see how wide it goes and how high it goes, and how many people are engaged in it now. We only know two sets that so far. One from court documents, and now we know this deal. We don't know who they're selling the fuel to, if any fuel has been imported. Nobody is giving us answers to this latest saga. But please, I'm asking the media to look into this, because we're talking about billions of dollars being siphoned off from the Treasury. I want to urge the government again to release the contracts, because it's fallen on deaf ears. The president keeps making excuses. It's easy for him to release all the contracts they said that were corrupt: the airport, the hospital, Marriott, the road, Fifth Motilal Road, the infamous evaluation report, the evaluation report for new GPC, the new GPC, all of these for the pre-qualification, all of these. I've been urging them to do that. Can you please now ask the Minister of Finance how much money have the audits showed up or found in the GGMC, in the GFC, in NFMU, in the Lotto funds? Remember, they said these were slush funds of the PPP and that they will transfer them almost immediately. Can you find out the corruption that they found in these funds, and when the minister plans to transfer them? Has he transferred any of these to the Treasury? They need to come clean in the public about these things. What they found in these so-called slush funds that the PPP operated, and since they claimed that they were illegally kept outside of the Treasury, what are they doing now? They said that NISIL, they would close NISIL. So what's their position, new position now? Are they going to close NISIL? Another thing I'd like to ask is that you find out how much we spend to upkeep our Prime Minister. You know, because we've heard in the pre-election period how much Jagdeo's pension and a few other pensions were costing the Treasury. Well, it was Jagdeo. So now, but now with Sam Hines and Ramatar, our pensions, we get our pensions. They know what the pensions are, what our benefits are available. But we were three of us, three former heads of state. We now have 27 ministers. I would say to you, we are spending more on in a month on a minister than we used to spend on an ex-president with pension and everything else that served the country. We're spending more. Some ministers, we are renting properties that cost $1 million a month for some of these ministers. Why don't you find out a bit about how many properties are being rented for ministers and what's the cost and what their salary? Some of them are getting close to $1 million a month, some 1.3 million a month, and all the other benefits. You'll end up at close to maybe $2.5 million easily for some of those ministers per month we're spending on. The Prime Minister is close to $8 million a month we're spending on him. Close to $8 million a month, leaving out all the fantastic sums that they have spent on rehabilitation of State House and the Prime Minister's house, and the millions, tens of millions on new furniture, etc. Leaving out all of those and new vehicles that are bound. I'm talking about monthly costs. You should just find out. And they were complaining about my pension and a couple of other things. And now these ministers. So it would be a good thing to follow up on. And it would be good to follow up on what's happening to this cleanup program now too in the city. Remember, that was the big showpiece. So the money disappeared, as we predicted, because they were just using money that they did not have to spend on the cleanup. They were using money that they raked in from all sorts of deals for arrears. Now I see they're saying they want to go after NISIL for some payments, but the City Council probably owes GPL close to $1.5 billion. City Council owes GPL over $1.5 billion. They can't find money now to pay to collect garbage, but they found money to put in these parks and all these things that are now falling apart already. We predicted it. We said that the money for the cleanup was not coming from recurrent revenue. You're using arrears. You're making deals to collect arrears, and you're spending it. What will happen when that's over? So that was the big thing about the government. Oh, we're cleaning up the city. Well, I supported that. We support the cleaning up of the city. But it can't be just for a couple of days. It has to continue continuously. And this is the problem with this government and money. It's managing it in a way, that recognizes there is a tomorrow too. We warned about it. They spent up everything. And we would like to see the city resume, especially in front of the leader of the opposition's office. They used to be there every day cleaning up and stuff. And my building is there too, the foundation building. So they pushed up my property value. We'd like them to clean up there and stuff. I see a lot of grass growing there once again. The canals are clogging up. So I'd be happy if the city council could clean up those places. I'd stop there. And one last question. Does the president really want to know what's going on in his government? Does he want to know what's going on?
Okay, thank you very much. You've heard the opposition leader. I now invite you for your questions. Kindly follow protocol and identify yourself.
Last morning's citizen report. Dr. Do you have a comment on the announced move to increase the toll at the Suicide Bridge?
Oh, is there an announcement that they're going to increase at where? Which bridge? In Linden. Oh, this will bring hardships to the people of Linden. Why would you want to do something like that? why would you want to do something? People will minimize passing through there. If going across the bridge now for people who live on the other side of the river would mean probably higher fares. It will mean more increase in cost of living because goods and that they take over will cost more. Why do you want to do that now? And this, let me tell you, the government is still flush with money that we left. They still have a lot of money. But they're on this, I don't understand, a counterproductive sort of policy to bring hardships to people, ordinary people, like the banning of the cars and the tires. And it's not just there. At MMA, they've just decided now to increase the rentals there for property rates and taxes, D&I charges. So they will bring huge problems for people who live in West Coast Berbice, including many who supported APNU. Almost half of the population of Region 5 voted for APNU. I think we got a few thousand votes, only more than APNU in that region. And they've just decided to increase the tolls there. Even if you, why would you do something like that at this time when things are tough for people? At this time, it's unbelievable.
A quick follow-up. The Region 10 is used as a gateway to the many communities in the interior. This obviously will extend to hardships for the Amerindians, no?
Yes, but not just the Amerindians, but people in Region 10 itself and people who live across the river. Is it the road or the bridge?
It's for certain categories of vehicles carrying goods to pay a toll for using the roads.
Oh, for using the roads too. So it will mean hardship for people on both sides of the river. I thought it was the bridge crossing the river. So it means more hardship for people there. What would that result in? Businessmen are not going to absorb those costs. They're going to just pass it on to the communities.
Here's a guy. Sir, if I can bring you back to the cabinet committee and that review. You essentially said, by not using the word, that there's massive corruption here. What you did say is find out all the people who've been frequenting the middle street. You'll find how big the connections run to cabinet, and cabinet essentially directed Minister Martin. I was hoping you could expand a little more on what you meant there and what courses, what avenues available to the opposition in terms of remedying this. And are you still going to go after Minister Martin at the committee level? Because you seem to suggest that it's not his fault.
Yeah, but he lied in Parliament. So he would have to face the consequences in Parliament. So he lied to the Parliament, and he needs to face the consequences. I think this thing about the apology, so he does it, but they don't change the contract. It's just to prevent him from being sanctioned in Parliament. So he sends an apology to the Speaker. The Speaker says, no, the minister has apologized, so there's no need to send him any longer to the Committee of Privileges. It gives the Speaker a way of saying the minister has apologized. I think that the test of this issue will be whether they are prepared to terminate this contract and to give us the real details. They have to have an external investigation. Who directed them to Larry Singh, who has never stored drugs before? Who directed them? And I think the other comment was quite clear. I said, I'm urging the media to do some more investigative work. on a few issues, because I think the media probably will get more access. We raised several issues. On most of the issues that we raised, we're not getting answers. Look at the one about the BK settlement. It has now come out that what they said to the parliament was also not true. And we have to examine, I asked Gail to look at the documents, the verbatim answered, and to see what exactly was said, so we can take this steps in relation to that too. But we were told that that the government had to do this, had to make this settlement, because they ran the risk of losing a case worth $10 million when there was no such case. And to say that the Chief Justice, I keep seeing they said the Chief Justice ordered compensation. The Chief Justice did not order compensation. So they were hiding behind that. The Chief Justice said the termination wasn't done properly, but there was no claim in the court from the guy. So now we are hearing from Vulcan, he wrote them a letter. Now, the reason why my worry is a letter can always be fabricated, backdated. But if you talk about court case, you can now go and file in the registry. It would show. And so we received this letter. Now, is this how you're going to run the government? If somebody makes a claim against government, I'm going to write a few letters myself. We have a few court cases, but they're not settling with us. Myself, Donald, and Sam, we have a case against the government, and they're not settling that, although that will cost just a tiny fraction of this $80 billion they have given away to their friends and families. Friends and family, you see how the friends and family thing come all the way around? Full circle. And so that again, pure excuse. We can't get any info out of the government. Look how hard it is for the media to get the information. When we go to Parliament, they laugh, they joke about it. You look at the government benches, something funny is going on in Parliament when we ask questions. And this is about serious matter. We have asked for a list of donors for the Durban Park. Now, how much money we gather? It runs into hundreds of millions of dollars were collected in material and cash. Who has accounted for this? Forget the part that they spent from government resources. Who collected this? We've asked for this from the inauguration of the president. The money spent by private individuals. They said, you recall the big issue that government funds were not spent and stuff. Then if government funds were not spent on a state activity, this is a state activity, whose money was spent? Whose money was spent? And are the people who supplied the money, are they getting benefits now? Is this the payoff now? I saw one individual wrote a letter to the Kaichor News and saying, I blocked his road or something. Years ago, I don't even know where the man lived, but I blocked his road being fixed. Maybe I shouldn't deal with that now. But find out at the GRA if that person also had a youth settlement at the GRA. Or find out if that person, yes, I'm giving.
All this wastage of public funds and questionable deals with public funds, but our procurement laws provide penalties for abuse of public funds. Why isn't the PPP challenging this in court? essentially said that the APN campaign was financed in part by your money. Why isn't this something being reported, at least to the police challenge
No,
officially?
I asked the question. I said, we are aware that this gentleman, and there's been no secret about this, that Mr. Blackman was a staunch supporter of APNU. Several times, over the years, now he is now being convicted for drug dealing in the United States of America. He was brought back by this government to chair the Georgetown Hospital. He was on his way back to take up that post in Guyana. He was central in the campaign in 2015, as he was in previous campaign. I'm asking, that's what I'm asking. Was some of the money spent, and how much? You need to ask the General Secretary. Did they receive a donation, and how much did they receive from him? That's what I'm finding out. If it was the PPP, there would be an automatic assumption that he funded our whole campaign. The same standards don't hold for the two parties. Same standards don't hold. Yeah. Yes. All right. I've given you enough. Yeah. Oh, the procurement laws. The procurement laws allow aggrieved parties to take action. I'm hoping with the establishment of the Public Procurement Commission now, that a citizen X, any citizen, can now go and say to the Public Procurement Commission, here are some of the facts that we know. We're asking for an investigation. But if you're an aggrieved, under our procurement law, only if you're an aggrieved party, say you're a tender, and you believe that a tender has been given to someone unfairly, then you can file a protest. But I don't think it allows for third parties to do so. But in this case, the public procurement, because it's a constitutional body, you'll be able to file there. Yes. Yeah.
Can you say, when it comes to your document, if it is that you rented properties were rented, and if the figures could be compared to what is being rented for now? And I want to go to the person that made the acquisition about the road, I think it is you were saying from Midco, and even Mr. Glenn spoke about the fact that directions were given from you, basically, that these streets were not to be looked after. And there's this perception that you've been dictated because these roads should be done, but yet you give instructions that they should not take place.
Yeah.
I want to ask about that. And the other question, this landfill issue, is it something that started under the PPPC government, the issue? And looking at the court challenge that persisted, didn't the government act in the best interests of the people when it went to the settlement? Because I'm thinking if BK had filed another challenge probably to block anything from happening here, the question would have been asked, where would be done the waste? Given that nothing could have possibly taken place at the landfill site.
Okay. So let me deal with the first issue. You asked about rental of properties and whether it could be compared. I have somebody now doing exactly that. Take, for example, the building that we rented to have the OLPF. You will see the difference. There is a lot now, an empty lot that the government is renting for $800,000. An empty lot for storage. So that's precisely what we plan to do, to show we're going to ask the question in Parliament to tell us all the rentals, and then we're going to show comparably where the PPP, what the PPP did. So we're going to get to that in probably a month or two, but it would be helpful if you could get the figures, and you could ask also about this. You know, most of the ministers under the PPP some lived in a chili bar and a couple other places. I don't know what's going on in a chili bar, who's gone in there now, but it doesn't seem like ministers like the chili bar anymore. The second issue is I don't even know where this man lives. To say that I will tell somebody not to fix his road when I don't know where he lives. Secondly, I saw they said Enrico Wolford too. I didn't fix his road. I don't know where Enrico Wolford lives.
So you don't know where Glenlal lives? You know where
Glenlal is another case. Anything, Glenlal is another case. Anything about Jagdeo, he must be the victim of Jagdeo's vindictiveness. So he is another case. But I can tell you that I don't know. The thing is that I was surprised that when Nagamutu said, when they fixed his road, he said, I didn't know about this, you know. It must be because, you know, other people live on this street. I had nothing to do with it, and people believed it and moved on. In this case, he denied knowledge of them knowing that he lived on that street, and they fixed his road only for him. But Jagdeo, it must be that Jagdeo told the people to stop ropes and bend, stop. Half of these people I don't even know. Let me tell you something. The things I get blamed for, sometimes I find them funny. But some people do believe. When I was president, my days were spent working. It's either at home, because I got away from people sometimes so that I'm not bothered by phone calls and all of that, so I can really read documents, etc., or in the office. Not worried about whose road is being fixed. I worked at ensuring there's money to fix roads. Once every 3 months, I had a project meeting to say, how are our projects going? What about the foreign funded projects, the local projects? Is there fiscal space? Are we going to adjust? That sort of thing. Yeah, but let me tell you, you know, people have motives. So suddenly one man calls out of the blue to say, I didn't fix his road. Now in 2011, I left office. In 2013, 2014, I received several calls from the same Mr. Deo Singh, saying, you're the only one who can help me. I was supposed to be the vindictive man. Can you work as the government to settle my tax matters in GRA? And it's close to $1 billion. And let me make it clear, I didn't want to talk about it, but he opened the door, and you know, and I think you led me to this, but sometimes we have to say these things. VAT was paid and not remitted, close to 600 million. PAYE, not remitted to the GRA, collected and not remitted, and then corporate tax. He himself told me this. He sent me documents. So now, in 2016, I didn't fix his road when I was president in 2011, but in 2013, 2014, etc., I received several documents from him. He raised it with me, etc., to talk about helping him with the GRA. And I said, no, I don't get involved in those things. But I suspect that because from what I gather, there was a move to settle, or they have settled. And a letter was written by a staff in the GRA to question the settlement, to question the settlement that it is not in keeping with the law. So it either was settled or about to be settled, and a letter was written. Now, how do you get the government to think favorably of you? You choose the man who they probably hate most, and then you criticize him publicly. And that happens to be Jagdeo, I think. And so you suddenly make your case that I have good APNU credentials. Look, I was the victim of Jagdeo I was a victim of Jagdeo. So that sends a signal. You got to help me. People have motives behind lots of things. I did not want to deal with this matter today because, but I can name tens of cases of a similar nature where people do things for a purpose. For a purpose. So you ask the government about this, whether they have been, the staff of GRA was called several times to have this case settled.
Settlement by arbitration.
Yes, because they're, and the last one, yeah. I don't want to say it, but you sound precisely like the government. Oh no, what? I'm not saying you are. It may be that this is typical, yeah, well, we can lose something, so don't fight for it. Don't fight. All these years, we fought in the courts to represent government's interests. Over and over on several tax cases, etc. We were fighting there. And suddenly, there's a fear that we may lose something, There's a fear that it could be larger. So why not apply that to every case that the government has? Every case, there should be that fear. So I want to file something or urge someone to file for $100 million now for deprivation of benefits. And then the government may be fearful of that and give you $50 million. It is an absurd excuse for government. Absurd. It's unbelievable that they would do that. And it's a cover for all sorts of corrupt deals. Yeah. Yes, please. I saw the report had a disclaimer saying those are not the views of the U.S. government or USAID. Because I suspect the U.S. government would know that that's not true. But these consultants, when they come, it depends on who they meet. So if they meet Nagamutu, your Nagamutu with his olive branch, this time he doesn't even have a dry branch to offer, much less an olive branch. He has no power. He offered an olive branch to the PPP. It's purely nonsensical. There has been no proposal to any proposal about power sharing or anything of that sort. There's been no formal proposal put to the government, to the PPP in that regard. And so that is not, the report is, as I said before, not the views of the U.S. government, just consultants.
On that same note, Basil Williams, in the up to PNC Congress, Basil Williams has mentioned that he's confident that he will join the coalition. I just want to get his views on that.
Join the coalition. I have no doubt that people have to work together for the development of Guyana. And APNU does have a constituency, like the PPP. And we have to find ways of working together. but it has to be on the basis of clear principles. And we are not a party that some people thought that we were going to beg to be part of this government. I heard disparaging things like, being said about us. We're not anxious or begging to be part of any form in the executive. But I do believe that people have to work together for the interests of the country. And we have put some issues out. We've made it clear that I said to the president from the beginning, when you're done with campaigning, when you're done with destroying, basically, by extension, I didn't say this to him, but and I said within the next 3 months, but this went on. I said, when you're done with that, we're prepared to engage. But they are still in the campaign mode. They're still in the mode of destroying reputations. They're in the mode of not wanting to find the truth. They're not interested in finding the truth as to whether there was corruption in the Marriott or not, because they can release the report, or in the hydropower project, or in the hospital project. They are busy trying to destroy reputations. And when they're done with that, when they're done with targeting people on the basis of their politics, as I said before, if you're black or Amerindian and you're PBP, you get targeted. And if you're Indo-Ghanese, there's an automatical assumption that you're PPP too. When they're done with that, when they're done with this campaign of destroying reputations, then maybe we can start talking about issues that are very, very important for our country, but and they have to reverse those things. They have to reverse them. They have to stop targeting sectors on the basis that they are, strongholds of the PPP. The rice industry, the sugar. They have to make an effort to save these industries, just like we did with every other industry. I explained how much work we did on bauxite. I can go through it here again. What we did to try to save bauxite and keep the community alive. How we subsidized the electricity in Linden. Just because they're Guyanese, they have to do the same for Wales and many other areas. Not interested. And so when all of those things are dealt with, then maybe the atmosphere would be right to have a frank talk when they're done with saying this is our time now. Then there would be an atmosphere to engage.
Martin Haley, Kaiser News. Recently reviewed some articles concerning the importation of some products by traders which could be produced right in Guyana. Could you say, in terms of during your tenure, what sort of measures were in place to help local manufacturers?
Sure.
And what could be done now?
I think it's a brilliant series of articles. These are the kinds of things we need, including in the newspapers, because they can push policymakers in a particular direction. Now, the manufacturing sector is not that large in Guyana, but it has huge possibilities. And it is severely disadvantaged for several reasons. The main one is our cost, and particularly the cost of electricity. So and then when you go down the line, you'd look at freight, both to get goods out as well as to fly them out by sea or air. So we had a plan to not just support the manufacturing sector, but all sectors, all productive sectors, and to make our goods more globally competitive. The only way you can do this is through a systematic approach. So we looked at, first of all, electricity. We had to bring the costs down, and hence the hydropower from renewable. Secondly, the information communication technology. We had a policy because it can help to enhance productivity. And so we had a plan to take this across the country and make people more computer literate, so you increase the productivity of the labor force, apart from more training. We then put in place something that the government talks a lot about now, training young people. Through I forgot the name of the scheme. I think it was BIT, Board of Industrial Training. I went with Clifford Reese, and at his place they launched a program, an apprenticeship program, that was then carried out by the BIT. We're training like 2,000 young people per year nearly, who are dropouts and other things, trying to produce more skills to them. Then the incentive regime. If you're a registered manufacturer, you then are eligible for certain concessions, including duty-free input, right, which is now a problem because of the implementation of the CET on those inputs. But if you're a registered manufacturer. Then we looked at the airport. The expansion of the airport would have caused us to bring in bigger aircrafts so that the freight will drop. We are looking at the deepwater harbor. So once you get bigger ships coming to Guyana, etc. These are all important things on the way to improve manufacturing. And then all of that can be done. But the key thing is defending rigidly your manufacturing sector too. And so for years I've been trying to find out the subsidy policy of the Trinidad and Suriname in relation to electricity subsidy, because we operate in the same market. Many of the products you talk about, they come in from Trinidad. Like the chana and all of that stuff, fried chana and lots of those things. But the electricity is heavily subsidized. I mentioned this, I think right here, that we tried to get Patrick Manning to admit to it, myself and Owen Otter, for years, because we are arguing competitive disadvantage in a single market and economy. The government last year admitted it in Trinidad and Tobago. We have not done, I raised it with our Minister of Business and Parliament. We have not done anything so far to address that issue. On the other hand, we're busy trying to comply with some CARICOM rules that no one else complies with, putting more pressure on our manufacturers, rather than protecting them because of the fair application of these things. We're putting pressure on our manufacturers. So it's going to be, we don't have we're never going to be a manufacturing powerhouse like China or so. We don't have the large workforce, etc. But I think we can find good niches. Like I always argue to people thought I was crazy that we should import logs to do manufacturing. And people said, one time I said this, and they said, you're crazy. But if we can export some of our logs and get a higher price for them, but import logs to manufacture stuff like maybe pine or something, treated logs, there's no problem with doing that, because a place like Korea or Japan, they don't have any raw material. Most of their raw material are imported, finished, and then re-exported. So if we can import pine and all of that sort, because if there is a big market for pine doors, etc., then we should do that. I'm not saying that we must not add value to products here. We must do that as far as possible. But this policy of the government not to export law or to ban export of law doesn't make sense. It was the old kind of thinking where we started by saying, let's ban the importation of wheat and flour and use rice. But if we can export our rice and earn more, and it makes sense to import wheat and do the same thing. It's comparative advantage. You have to look at it. And it should open a full debate, because people have different views on this. Maybe this is what the Minister of Business should be doing, opening up a full debate and saying to people, small people, we will give you a special tax rate if you do the chana and the nuts and all of these things that can be produced here. We'll give you a special tax rate. You know, if they want to do better than we did, they can do some of these things.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Just like to hear your views on the government consideration of the use of marijuana for private.
We made it clear, if you check our manifesto, the PPP manifesto, you will see that in our manifesto we spoke about the issue, what we will do if we win back power. That we said that we will support the reduction or the removal of the penalty for people who use a small quantity, because too many of them go to jail for small quantity. You know, if you have like a little bit, you can go to jail for 3 years, 5 years, etc. But we don't support the decriminalization of marijuana, because we don't support marijuana production, the growing of the trees. We don't support the production. We don't support the sale. We don't support the export. Okay? But too many of our young people go to jail because they just have one joint, and they can be sent to other places. They can be sent to rehab. They can be sent to community service, or rather than being in prison. And so this is our position. So when we were told about it, Mr. Hughes came, Nigel Hughes came and saw me. I said, the party will discuss this, and we discussed it at the party level. It was in our manifesto. We're not hiding from the issue, unlike the other parties. We put it in our manifesto in the 2015 elections. It's there. And we said we will allow a conscience vote. Those members of the PPP MPs who want to support it can support it, and those who don't want to support it will not need to support it. But I think too many of our young people, these boys in the city or in the village just make one smoke and they're in prison for 3 years. We can use our prison space for more serious crime. Let's send them to rehab. Let's lock them in a program or have them clean up the school compounds and the village canals and stuff like that for a while. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.